Welcome to Detroit. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass. You can drown them. And that's what we gotta be. That's who we have to be. Because that's our domain. That is our domain. Because we'll tread water as long as it takes to fucking bury you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, all Detroit Lions, friends, fans, and family members, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving back in. So, folks, we all know what we're about to talk about with this episode. We all know the major news that broke this morning in pertinence to the Detroit Lions, which is that they officially restructured Jared Goff's contract. It's a move that Lions fans have been long waiting for. They all knew it was going to happen, but we're waiting for it nonetheless, and we're like, okay, when are the Lions going to do this? And I'd been asked this question a couple of times on previous videos as to why they hadn't done it or when were they going to do it, and I said, listen, I know the Lions are going to do it, but if there's one thing I also know about the Lions is they like to do things on their own time schedule. They like to do things when they feel like they want to do them. So this move absolutely falls within that category. And I'll say this for what it is. The restructuring of Jared Goff's contract is a key move. It's a crucial move. It's an absolutely needed move. But I'm going to just simply call this also for what it is. It's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough. The Lions are going to most likely have to restructure one more contract. And I'm going to explain to you why that's going to have to be the case here. And if you understand cap at least a little bit, you can figure it out pretty quickly. Let's understand what we already knew about the Lions' current cap situation. They already were coming into this year over the cap, even with the rollover cap that they had from last year. Now, obviously, trading away David Montgomery, cutting Graham Glasgow, releasing, Taylor Decker, all of that definitely made some cap space. But it was never going to be enough for them in order to do what they were going to need to do for this offseason, whether it's in terms of free agency and then also with the draft, and then subsequently when they're also going to try and extend upcoming players. Now, we all know the details of how much money the Lions got freed up from Jared Goff's contract. They were able to free up $32 million of cap space for this current season. They converted $40 million of his salary into a signing bonus, which is automatically paid out to the player. Well, the reason why it's only 32 this year is because $8 million of it got tacked onto a void year at the end of the contract. So, okay, we now know that. Or it got tacked on to the last year of the contract and they added a void year, one way or the other. That's where the other $8 million went out of the $32 million that was freed up for this year. Very simple restructure. Well, here's the problem, though. The problem is that if you take a look at what the Lions are going to want to do, like I said, it's simply just not going to be enough. They're going to need more. And in order to get more, they're going to have to restructure at least one more deal. And let me tell you exactly why I know this. Again, if you just take a look at some very, public available knowledge and information that's out there, you'd be able to figure it out pretty quickly. If you go to either Spot Rack or you go to Over the Cap, currently the Lions are sitting, depending upon which website you prefer to use, but either way, they're pretty damn close at this point, either $35 to $37 million. That sounds like a lot of money, but in reality, it's a misleading figure. And the reason why it's a misleading figure is because of the fact that that number of $35 to $37 million, it's not factoring in all the new contracts that the Lions have negotiated to sign the players that they've brought in. It doesn't factor in the Cade Mays contract yet. It doesn't factor in Teddy Bridgewater's contract, Malcolm Rodriguez's contract, Isaiah Pacheco's contract. It doesn't factor in all the contracts that the Lions have just recently signed. So, okay here. We currently have, according to Spot Rack or Over the Cap, $35 to $37 million. But if you factor in those 6 other guys that we just signed, I would be willing to bet that you're probably going to have to subtract at least a good $10 million from that current amount. Because, okay, we know that all the other contracts, save the Cade Mays one, are most likely or are one-year deals, which means that the contract cap is exactly what it is. So, okay, you got $1.8 million for Pacheco. You're probably going to have at least another, I think somebody reported that for Larry Baram, that's $2.5 million. So, okay, another 2.5 there. Don't know what it is for Teddy Bridgewater yet, but most likely going to be another one-year contract, probably, a vet minimum, maybe $1.5-2 million contract. Same thing's probably going to be the case for, for Rodrigo. And then obviously you have the 1-year, $4 million contract that you just signed for, Rock Ya-Sin. And then you have the 3-year, $25 million contract that you handed out to, Cade Mays. Just basing that off of what I'm, putting together in my head, that's most likely going to be about $10 to $12 million of cap that you freed up that's then going to go right back out the door. So, okay, you have $35 to $37 million without knowing the full details of how those contracts are broken down. I'm spitballing that you're going to have about $10 to $12 million of it that's going to go right back out the door once all the cap figures are figured out for those contracts. So, okay, 35 to 37 mil then goes down to what? You're talking about $23 to $25 million. Okay, $23 to $25 million is still a decent number of cap space, but you then have to factor in something else. You have to factor in the draft class that's coming up. Draft classes usually take anywhere between $10 to $12 million. So, okay, you're at $23, $25 million. Now you then subtract another $10 to $12 million on top of that. So now you're looking at what? 20, you're looking at what? 11 to maybe, 13, $14 million worth of cap space? That's not a whole hell of a lot at all. It's especially not a lot considering the fact that the Lions are going to want to extend players that have contracts that are coming up that they're definitely going to want to keep in town, which all are from the 2023 draft class. They're going to want to extend, they're going to want to extend Jack Campbell. They're going to want to extend Jahmyr Gibbs. They're going to want to extend Brian Branch. They're going to want to extend, Sam Laporta. Now, the ones that definitely need to get extended sooner rather than later is obviously Branch and Laporta's contracts because they do not have the 5th-year option that Gibbs and Campbell's contract have. The problem is that both Laporta and Branch are coming back from season-ending injuries. So you have to wait, you have to gauge, and you have to factor in that as far as, okay, how much money are you going to pay them, and is it worthwhile to invest long-term in them, which I obviously believe that they should. But again, that's part of the equation. Then you still also have to factor in, eventually you're going to have to extend Jahmyr Gibbs, you're going to have to extend Jack Campbell as well. Now, you could put those two guys off until next year because you have that 5th-year option availability, which we know the Lions have used that in the past under Brad Holmes. But the point of the matter is when you're only talking about, 11 to 13 or 14 million dollars, that's not going to be enough to potentially extend both Laporta and Branch. And final consideration all this is having a healthy reserve of cap space left over if for whatever reason you need to make moves, such as an injury occurs, such as a player becomes available that you really, really want, whatever the case might be. So if you realistically want to think about it, yeah, spot racking over the cap, say, yeah, the Lions are flush with cap space, but that's a misleading false number. If you know how much things certainly cost in the NFL, or you can kind of spitball based on certain information, the Lions really only have about 11 to 13 million dollars of actual cap space that's available to them. Unless Brad Holmes really did some, great maneuvering with that Cade Mays contract, way more than what I thought it is. But the point is that by restructuring Jared Goff's contract, yes, you now are compliant with being under the cap for the new league year that's going to become official at 4 p.m. today. But we know that the Lions do not like having very little cap space to work with. They like having a healthy reservoir or a healthy allotment still available in case they need to make moves. And and so that way they can extend players. Because, okay, you have to extend Branch, you have to extend Laporta sooner rather than later. Way sooner than you'd have to do with either Gibbs or Campbell because of that fifth-year option that they have in their first-round, rookie contracts. But then you also have to factor in that there's other guys that they've now signed where they're probably going to have to, well, not probably, they're going to have to deal with this whole thing next year. Because the Malcolm Rodriguez contract was a one-year deal. I guarantee you they're going to want to bring him back again. So that's another contract you're going to have to deal with. And then you've got other guys that are, coming shortly up on their new deals that they're going to have to re-sign. So it's like, okay, when you factor in everything, the Lions do not have the kind of salary cap, space or room that they realistically are going to want to have. Which to me tells me that another restructure is going to have to happen most likely. Now, obviously, everybody knows who the next likely candidates after Goff's restructuring has occurred. That would be Amon-Ra St. Brown, that would be Penei Sewell, or it would be Aleem McNeil. Now, which one of those three they decide to do, I couldn't tell you. But I would like to think if they were going to do it, they're probably going to restructure Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract. That's the one that's probably got the most amount of room for them to, potentially get more cap from. But at the same time, Amon-Ra St. Brown works directly with Jared Goff. Jared Goff has now set the precedent. He's the leader. I would like to think that most likely he's going to be the one that they're going to tag to be the other restructuring. So that way they could free up at least another $20 or so million. So that way, okay, it's like, hey, you actually do have about $30 plus million worth to work with. Which means, okay, you have enough to then potentially extend players like, Branch and also Laporta. But then if you felt that there was a move that you realistically would like to make, you still could do it, whether it's a big splash move or whether it's a couple more of these other moves that Brad Holmes has really been making that are kind of like, in my opinion, minor splash moves because they're not big on value, they're not big names, but they do have some name recognition to them. But to me, it's like one way or the other, no matter how I look at this, no matter how much I logically think it over, the Lions are going to have to do at least one more restructure. Otherwise, they're simply not going to have the cap space that they would like to have, not only to get through the rest of this offseason, but also then to deal with the extensions that they're going to want to get done, and also have a healthy reserve in case something comes up during the season. Because that's the only way I see this working. Now, again, I will say this for what it is. I am not a salary cap expert. I'm just basing this off of pure common sense and logic. Does not mean I have all the information, does not mean I know everything I'm talking about when it comes to the salary cap. But if you just understand it basically enough like what I do, you pretty much are figuring out relatively quickly here, just doing some basic math and basic common sense reasoning, the Lions don't have as much cap space as I know Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and the rest of the front office is going to want to have. 11 to 13, $14 million is not enough to have that you're going to feel comfortable going into the season. It just simply isn't. Especially when, like I said, you want to get those extensions done. So I feel that, by the end of today, there is a possibility that we might see another restructure come about. I really could see that happening. It would not at all shock me. And again, whether it's St. Brown, whether it's Penei Sewell, whether it's Aleem McNeil, I don't know. But I'm pretty confident that one of those three guys is going to have an announcement here from the Lions or from one of the NFL insiders that have been pushing out all the notifications that the Lions are going to restructure them. Now, on the flip side, let's say if they don't decide to do it. Well, then I'm just going to say this. I'm still going to trust Brad Holmes and Mike Disner as to what they're doing, but I'm then going to start having a really big question in the back of my head of, okay, how do you plan to then pay for all of this other stuff here? How then do you have the reservoir that you're going to want to have as far as cap space in case something comes up? Because again, 11 to 13, 14 million dollars is not a whole hell of a lot. So there's definitely at least one more hurdle that I could see the Lions trying to, navigate here. But if they decide not to do it, like I said, it's going to leave a really big question mark that I'm going to be like, okay, here, what exactly do the Lions do? Because I try to make the most sense of everything that's going on here, both what does happen and what does not happen. And I'm trying to present both sides of the equation here because until one of those two things happen, either they don't decide to restructure somebody else or they do, it's kind of like, okay, here, we're waiting and seeing what happens next kind of thing. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about this really quickly, give my thoughts about the whole Jared Goff restructure, which obviously I'm ecstatic for, makes total sense, absolutely needed, but, definitely going to have to at least get another move, another restructure done, in my humble opinion as well. And if not, I'm going to be very curious to see what the Lions then decide to do moving forward. But anyway, just wanted to talk about this, just wanted to, present my thoughts, present my opinions. Having done so, I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to watch the next episode or any of my previous content. If you enjoyed this content and have not yet done so, I'd also like to encourage you all please to show your support and subscribe to the channel. But if you subscribed in the past and forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and also have not yet had a chance to do so, please show your support by also making sure you hit that bell notification icon so that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. Hope y'all are doing well. Hope y'all got something in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile. God bless, my friends. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.